If you clicked on this video, then probably on one of your coffee tables you have a Vogue magazine just lying around with no purpose, and you probably never read it, or maybe opened that but didn't really stick to it. And I get it. Let's admit it. Mostly Vogue is garbage. Alright guys, so as you could guess, today we're going to be talking with you about Vogue and all the controversies around the magazine, as there have been a lot of them and all of them were constantly brought up lately. So we're gonna remember and discuss some of them, and I'll try to explain why personally I think that Vogue is a garbage magazine and we should not support it. It goes without saying that Vogue is one of the first fashion magazines, and it was started in 1892 in New York as a weekly newspaper. Then later in 1916, British Vogue was its first overseas edition. And nowadays Vogue Italia is one of the most read fashion magazines in the world. There are more than 20 international editions nowadays. Such a vast distribution obviously gives Vogue an immense power in the world of fashion and basically creates a monopoly in the fashion world. Of course, there are great products that they offer, especially when it comes to fashion coverages. Vogue is always one of the first ones to report about new collections and describe them to the reader, and sometimes day in day after show the collection review appears on Vogue Runway, which is a great app. I do really like it and I think they're doing a great job with it. But let's go back to the beginning. Since its very beginning, Vogue was targeting New York upper class, recounting their habits, their leisure activities, their social gatherings, the places they frequented, and the clothing they wore, and everyone who wanted to look like them and enter their exclusive circle. So obviously Vogue was catering for pretty sophisticated, well-educated and thriving for information crowd. Therefore, in the 1950s, Jessica Davis, the editor-in-chief in the Times, she absolutely changed the vision of Vogue. She introduced more sophisticated literature features about arts and fashion. So the Vogue became actually a great source of information and, as I already told, was catered towards upper class educated people. Davis believed that taste is something that can be taught and learned, and she edited Vogue with the conviction that it should be a vehicle to educate public taste. So yes, at some point Vogue was a great source of information about fashion, and in the 60s Vogue became a great cultural force as they were participating and embracing sexual revolution. They were standing with youth and they were trying to promote new standards of sexual revolution, and were one of the first magazines to openly discuss sexuality on their pages. So yeah, there were great times in Vogue. They started including features from controversial but unique figures like Andy Warhol, and Vogue continued in this very youthful but also information filled style until everything went south in 1988, when 38 years old Anna Wintour became an editor-in-chief. Firstly, she immediately decided to appeal to a broader audience, and she put on the cover Israeli model wearing Christian Lacroix jacket and jeans, which was very revolutionary at that time. She is very proud of this job, and in every single interview she is saying how revolutionary the decision was.
Who has been your favourite ever cover subject and why?
Well, I think the next one. I'm not a believer in looking back, but I have a few personal favorites. One is my very first cover at American Vogue, which was considered quite revolutionary at the time. It was a girl wearing a Christian Lacroix t-shirt with a cross on it, and blue jeans, and this was shocking back then, a tiny bit of stomach showing. And but when I saw that image, it just really seemed like it would declare that it was a different time at American Vogue, that fashion was changing, that it was a different moment. So we went with that cover.
But she's never thought how many people actually got fired because of her decision. Nevertheless, she was trying to appeal to a broader audience, to young people, to middle class rather than upper middle class. But it is very difficult for a person who has never been a middle class, who has always been part of upper class, to understand what do regular people like, what do regular people want. So her journey was pretty rocky. It is easy to understand that such a tremendous ignorance resulted in some controversies that we're going to discuss today. So let's dive straight into it and find out what is so wrong with Vogue and how many controversies has it been through. The problem existed even before Anna, and the first model to make it to the Vogue's cover was Beverly Johnson in 1974. That's almost 80 years since the first issue of the Vogue. And in her interview for the Washington Post, she said, "I was told before it could never happen. After my 1974 cover, I shot hundreds more, including 2 more covers for Vogue. I was the first black model on the cover of French Elle, but my race limited me to significantly lower compensation than my white peers. The industry was slow to include other black people in other aspects of the fashion and beauty industry. I was reprimanded for requesting black photographers, makeup artists, and hairstylists for photo shoots. Silence on race was then and still is the cost of admission to the other fashion industry's top echelons. Anna Wintour, who has been the editor-in-chief of Vogue for over 30 years, is currently the doyen of Condé Nast, admitted last week for a culture of structural exclusion at Vogue and across the fashion industry. Wow. After 3 decades, fashion's leading arbiter has finally acknowledged there may be a problem. Although Anna is so proud of her Naomi Campbell cover, and she talks about that again in every second interview. She was appointed as editor-in-chief in 1988, and only 5 years later, she decided that it's time to put a black girl on a cover. 5 years. And looking at the timeline, you can see that black models take up the cover only once in 3-5 years. Back in 2008, the US Vogue was accused in racism when they published a LeBron cover with the model Giselle Bundchen when he was holding her, and it wildly resembled a poster for King Kong movie. There is no way Anna hasn't thought that it resembled it, and she was just, yeah, it's fine, yeah. There was definitely an idea behind that, and that's very sad that it made its way to the cover. In July 2008, Vogue Italia released black issue that featured a couple of most famous black models like Naomi Campbell, and you know what? That just one more time proves out the point that there is no diversity. If there was diversity in Vogue, why would you need a black issue to feature black models? Why you cannot feature them in your regular issues in logical respective proportions, right? And do you think what changed after that? No. During the Black Lives Matter protests that has happened recently, all this dark shady stuff about Vogue just started to come up, and Anna Wintour tried to apologize for Vogue, and her apology honestly is so petty. I thought I wouldn't even discuss it today, but let's read together. I want to say plainly that I know Vogue has not found enough ways to elevate and give space to black editors, writers, photographers, designers, and other creators. We have made mistakes too, publishing images or stories that have been hurtful or intolerant, I take full responsibility for those mistakes. It can't be easy to be Black employee at Vogue, and there are too few of you. I know that it is not enough to say we will do better, but we will. And please know that I value your voices and responses as we move forward. I am listening and would like to hear your feedback and your advice if you would like to share either. Do we believe that she'd realised the problem only 30 years after being a chief and editor? No. Does she even understand what people are so angry about?
You eventually joined Harper's Bazaar US, and in 1976 you were fired, and I find that extraordinary.
No, they were very clear in that they thought that I would never understand the American market. I remember I was the editor on one shoot that was, I think it was the French fashion shows, and I decided that it would be interesting to have dreadlocks on the models, and I think that pushed them further than they could bear.
Obviously not. And what strikes me the most is that how she always attributes positive changes in Vogue, like, that her famous unorthodox first cover and then Naomi Campbell and stuff like that. She attributes it always to herself. She says, I put her on cover, I've done this to Vogue, I've done that. But when it comes to admitting the mistakes, she comes with this we. I just think it is highly unprofessional to be hiding behind this we when most of mistakes are made by you. Okay, so this is probably gonna be a big section because Vogue is just steadily coming up with new and new culturally insensitive materials which just spark controversy over and over again, and I think everyone is already tired to talk about that, how terrible they are. So let's just remember some of the worst of them. Obviously there were thousands, okay, not thousands, maybe a couple dozens of them, but it was definitely not a handful, there were plenty. And first one is publishing a feature article about Asma al-Assad, who is a wife of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, who is killing so many people every day, like literally since he became president and started war in 2011. I don't know the date exactly. So many people died. It's been like hundreds, thousands people dying in bombing because that dumbass cannot just, give country to people. He still wants to be president for some weird reason. In March 2017, there was a photo shoot starring Karlie Kloss in Japan. She was visiting tea house, posing with sumo wrestler and carrying a basket of cherry blossoms. A white model posing in traditional Japanese clothing. The whitewashing of Asian people in popular culture has been a big problem for years, and you could probably notice it. This photo shoot was just tremendously insensitive and appropriated Japanese culture. Even worse case of appropriation happened when Kylie Jenner was styled with afro for one of the photo shoots. Like, I don't even think I have to explain what's wrong with that. Like, what is your problem with just taking a black girl rather than styling white girl to look like black? If you style white girl to look like Asian, it is not diversity. If you style white girl to look like black girl instead of hiring a black girl, that's not about diversity. And if you don't give opportunities to black people to develop themselves in fashion industry, that is not diversity. And if you put a black girl on a cover once in 5 years, it is not about diversity. But diversity doesn't exist at Vogue, not only when it comes to culture and race, but also when it comes to size. In 2018, there was a cover released with 7 models of different phrases that was supposed to be different phrases and different body shapes, and Ashley Graham was also featured there. And if you take a look at the photo, she is the only one who is not wearing floral bright print. She's wearing just black pants because apparently in Vogue they think that black is still slimming, and that's what she needs to be. She needs to be slimmed. Also, you can notice that she's the only person who doesn't put her hand on a model next to her, but covers her thighs instead, which is just such a terrible move to do. And just looking at Vogue, you can understand that it is not catered towards plus-sized people. And it's just a small part of things that are wrong with Vogue. And the last thing that I wanted to discuss today is the Vogue's content quality. You know, it was meant to be a holy book for every fashion enthusiast. It was meant to be teaching us about fashion, telling us the stories behind the scenes. But I've stopped reading it about 2 years ago when I got into journalism, and when I started to understand how does that work, and when I got what advertorial and paid publications are. I was working for one of the corporate companies in the media department, so we were working with paid publications, and I just realized how many publications in magazines and newspapers are paid. And basically, that's what Vogue is. Vogue is just big advertisement. For example, you have an article about swimwear, but it doesn't simply give you ideas of what bikini you could buy. It sells to you directly. Same happens with articles about designers, hotels, whatever. Most of materials in Vogue is paid, and it does nothing but encourages you to buy more and spend your money. That's it. Honestly, I just don't see the point in buying Vogue. When I first got into journalism, I had this dream, I had this passion of working for Vogue. Firstly, I wanted to work for Vogue Arabia and then move to the UK or the US Vogue. I was so passionate about this idea, but actually studying and understanding the way it works, the principles that it holds, and just watching how 70 years old grandma destroying it day by day made me to realize that it's definitely not that what I want. It is not the best editorial to support. What I can say for sure that Vogue needs a big restart, and probably it cannot happen until Anna Wintour is gone. But for now, there is nothing Vogue can teach you about fashion. Educate yourself.